Spanking is the open-handed striking of a child on the buttocks or some other extremity, not with the goal of causing physical harm, but with the goal of changing behavior through negative reinforcement. Children, over 90% of American families report having used spanking as a means of discipline at one time or another, and more than half of 13 to 14-year-olds are still being spanked an average of 8 times a year. Almost 70% of American parents think spanking is not only good, but essential to a child's rearing, and 90% of parents spank their toddlers at least 3 times a week. 2/3 spank their toddlers once a day. 1 in 4 parents begin to spank when the child is 6 months old, 50% when their child is 12 months old, and 52% of 13 and 14-year-olds get spanked, as mentioned, as do 20% of high school seniors. So it is something that most parents feel quite ambivalent about. According to the studies, 93% of parents justify spanking, but 85% say that they'd rather not if they had some sort of acceptable alternative that they could really believe in. There is, in terms of the effects on children, there is a 93% agreement in scientific studies that spanking is harmful to children. Now, that missing 7% might sound like a lot, but in the realm of social sciences, a 93% agreement is, I think, beyond platinum to a diamond standard of correlation. Spanking has been shown in a wide variety of studies over the past 20 or 30 years to lead to more antisocial behavior in childhood and increased aggression, to increasing potential for spousal abuse when the child grows up, and child abuse in adulthood. One study shows that disciplining children by spanking puts youngsters at risk for becoming aggressive, antisocial, and chronically defiant. A woman who's been on my show, Dr. Elizabeth Gershoff, analyzed 88 studies over the years to determine the effects of spanking on child behaviors. And apart from immediate compliance, the research showed that spanking had negative effects on other behaviors. So very briefly, children who are spanked and slapped are twice as likely to develop alcohol addiction, other drug abuse problems, increased rates of anxiety disorders, alcohol abuse, drug abuse, antisocial behavior, and to some extent, depression. Spanking by parents can significantly damage a child's mental abilities and result in lower IQ later in life, suggests a study from the University of New Hampshire. And they also looked at corporal punishment practices in 32 countries and found a lower average IQ in nations in which spanking was more prevalent. I've got a video called The Facts About Spanking where the graphs are sort of all gone into. Kids who are physically punished, again, this is not beating, this is not hitting with implements, this is spanking, legal spanking according to the definition earlier. So kids who are physically punished had up to a 5-point lower IQ score than kids who weren't. And the more the children were spanked, the lower the IQ. In other words, it's dose dependent, which is a strong evidence, I think, of correlation. Study shows that corporal punishment slows the development of mental ability, particularly in children from 2 to 6. Parents who experience frequent corporal punishment are more likely to perceive it as acceptable and more likely to spank their own children. Frequent use of corporal punishment, which is a mother's use of spanking more than twice in the previous month when the child was 3 years of age, was associated with increased risk for higher levels of child aggression when the child was 5 years old. Even controlling for baseline antisocial behavior, the more 3 to 6-year-old children were hit, the worse their behavior was when assessed 3 years later. There are social problems, life problems. Corporal punishment is associated with increased levels of aggression and is a predictor of delinquency, violence, and crime in later life, and is, of course, as mentioned, a risk factor for child abuse. 12 or 13 recent studies found corporal punishment associated with a higher probability of delinquent and antisocial behavior. So there's a bit of a sort of firing cannon of correlational studies. Hopefully, the studies show spanking leads to increased child aggression, increased delinquent and antisocial behavior, decreased quality of parent-child relationships, decreased child mental health, increased physical abuse, increased adult aggression, increased adult criminal behavior, decreased adult mental health, and an increased risk of abusing one's own spouse or child. Now, with all of that disaster scenario there, I fully accept that there are a large number of people who were spanked who turned into very nice people as adults who don't exhibit these kinds of behaviors. Nonetheless, no parent knows ahead of time which of the epigenetic factors are going to be triggered by spanking. There are latent genes which seem to be activated by physical abuse or even just spanking, and you don't know ahead of time. You know, some people who smoke don't die of smoking. That doesn't mean that smoking is safe. So to depersonalize it a little bit, I'm not saying that this is the case for all children who were spanked, but there do seem to be some negative results from spanking that are pretty substantial.